Alrighty, so I just talked about non-market values, which are non-use values and use values that you can derive from biodiversity. And these sort of non-market values are not reflected in market transactions. I only have 3 slides on non-market valuation, but I want to show you that we have methods to estimate non-market values. And I want you to know that economists, especially environmental economists, don't just forget about such values. These non-market values are super important, especially in a biodiversity or environmental context. So we have different ways to do this non-market valuation. And if you take any environmental economics classes in this first year or in coming years, you'll learn more about these. There are methods we can use to value these intangible benefits that environment, including biodiversity, provides. So the first one is what we call a revealed preference approach. And revealed preferences are preferences that are revealed by the actions people take. Hedonic pricing is a method where we use statistics to estimate how much more people would be willing to pay for property that has an environmental benefit. So we look at the purchase prices of multiple properties, usually houses, and how they vary in their environmental benefits. For example, do they have a green park nearby? Or do they have lots of trees in their street? Or maybe are they close to a nice beach? And the premium that people are willing to pay on that property to get that environmental benefit gives an indication of the value they attach to that environmental feature. We've done several of those studies, and there's a few for Perth as well, looking for example at green space around houses. Another revealed preference approach, so where people reveal their preferences through the actions they take, is the travel cost method. We use this method mostly for recreational benefits, so those sort of use values where people visit a national park or some other natural asset. Usually we go to that place, to that site, and ask people how much they have spent to get there. So if people are willing to spend a lot of money to visit a site, it gives us an indication that they really value that site. So we could look at how much are they spending to visit Ningaloo Reef. You could also look at, well, what if we were to raise an entrance fee to a national park? How would that affect visitation? And that again gives us an indication how much people are willing to pay to get the benefits from that environmental site. You don't need to know how these work exactly, but I do want you to understand that these methods exist and what type of values you may be able to estimate using these non-market valuation methods. So next to revealed preference approaches, we have what we call stated preference approaches. And they're things like contingent valuation, choice experiments, best-worst scaling, and these are all survey methods where we present people with hypothetical scenarios of environmental changes. And we essentially ask them, how much are you willing to pay, or how much money are you willing to give up to protect this environmental feature, for example, biodiversity. There's also methods that show people different scenarios where biodiversity varies between the scenarios, and we ask them, which of these scenarios do you like best? Again, that tells us something about the implicit weight that people put on biodiversity and therefore the value they attach to it. I specialize in these sort of stated preference surveys, and if you're interested in doing more research in this topic or learning more about it, feel free to contact me and perhaps even do an honors project in a couple of years' time. Now, what do we do? Why do we even care about these values? Well, most importantly, we need numbers. We need to have some estimation to the welfare people receive from biodiversity. Because if we don't, it will easily get forgotten in policy development. If something is measured, it's much easier to include in any policy program. So what we do a lot in Australia is something called benefit cost analysis. That's a technique where we essentially evaluate for some course of action, for example, an environmental policy, what the costs will be and what the benefits will be. And the benefits of biodiversity protection often lie in those non-market benefits, whereas the costs are often in the implementation of, say, fencing for invasive species or implementing that protection program, excluding maybe visitors from a sensitive area. And those costs are very visual, whereas the non-market benefits are much harder to see. But if we estimate those non-market benefits, if we put numbers on them, policymakers will be able to include those numbers in their benefit cost analysis and will be able to make a better assessment of whether it's worth protecting biodiversity or not. So after this break, I'm going to show you some examples of how we've done that in our school.